Good morning and welcome to this Fianza webinar on fuel poverty and how can we ensure a socially fair renovation wave. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you in particular to the experts who have contributed to this research this year. And so without further ado, I would like to ask Ruth Owen, who's Deputy Director at Fianza, to introduce the webinar.
Okay,
thanks.
I don't seem to be able to activate my video, but there we go. Okay, so I'm Ruth Owen, and as Clotilde said, I'm Deputy Director at Fianza. Thank you to both the speakers and the participants for joining us. This webinar is going to present some lessons from a year of research on fuel poverty, with the aim of discussing and making progress towards how to get the renovation wave right from a social perspective, and especially from the perspective of people who experience poor housing conditions and housing exclusion in the European Union. So I don't want to take too much time away from the experts, but I'll say a few words to set the scene. I don't think it comes as news to anybody here that European countries are currently facing a cost of living crisis and an unprecedented housing crisis, whereby rising housing costs and inflation are making access to a decent and affordable home increasingly difficult. At the same time, we're faced with the urgency of the climate crisis and the ambition of net zero, hence the European Commission's proposal to trigger a renovation wave and to use the various legislative instruments under the Fit for 55 package in the framework of the Green Deal to do that. Fianza is an organisation dedicated to the fight against homelessness and housing exclusion, so that's very much our entry point to thinking about fuel poverty and energy efficient renovation. Clearly, renovation can be a tool to tackle poor housing conditions. However, the renovation wave may also drive housing exclusion through rising prices and processes of displacement. So we've been trying to gather the evidence to inform European and national policy making in order to get this transition right from a social perspective. We're really delighted to have these 6 reports to launch today that have really focused on Central and Eastern European countries and southern countries where the energy poverty situation is most acute. It's really critical for us to have this evidence because we want the renovation wave to be built on the reality of the housing stock and the living conditions of citizens, rather than just grand ideas and neat assumptions. There's no point renovating Europe's homes by making people homeless. Or put more positively, we mustn't miss the opportunity to tackle housing exclusion as well as reaching our climate goals. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to Marine Cornelis, who has undertaken a piece of research for us on how to avoid a renovation wave, and who will present the results of her research in order to kick off the discussion.
Comme moi.
Okay, thanks very much, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Ruth and Clotilde, and to everyone who is present here today. I hope you see my screen. Can somebody just wave at me or something?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So Clotilde asked me to share not only the content of the report that, I mean, it's available now, so you can really get through it. But she also asked me to share some key points and also some things that surprised me during the research that I performed. And so I will share them throughout the slides. So as you know, the multiple causes of energy poverty, you will see that I'm kind of addicted to pictograms. I think they really ease the understanding. So here you see a very a short summary of what energy poverty is, really at the crossroad of many issues, underlying issues. So really, the introduction is of the report is really about putting the renovation wave into context with European policy and funding. And I don't think that I need to get into too many details here, except perhaps mentioning that we're still missing probably earmark funds and bolder ambitions on the Can the person who has their microphone on can switch that off because I can hear them. Sorry for that. So yes, we really need some bolder ambitions on the social climate funds. So the big question that this report aims to answer to is, could the renovation wave trigger a renovation wave? And what could EU and national policymakers and also local policymakers do to avoid it? So the first part is really going into the assessment of energy renovation examples and lessons learned. And this is probably where I spent most of the time for two reasons. The first is that there is a lot of material and evidence demonstrating that without social safeguards, renovation policies can lead to gentrification and social exclusion. I'm not only talking about rising rents, but also about rising building or condominium charges that homeowners might pay. That might lead to eviction. I think that one of the most interesting things with this report is that it challenges this kind of very consensual approach that we have in Europe to say that the energy renovation is like a magic wand to solve everything, all the problems, because actually, especially with the crisis we are facing now, if energy renovation is done piecemeal without thinking about the overall social context or the urban dynamics, leads to gentrification and social exclusion and even more homelessness. And what I also found really interesting is that the situation is not only the case in Europe, it's also the case in North America. If you read through the report, you'll see that I've made two separate entries on the situation in California and Canada. And as it's often the case, the problem is even more acute on the other side of the Atlantic. So renovation really isn't a magic wand that can solve everything at once. And if we decide to be strict from a technical point of view on like the objectives, etc., we also must be strict in terms of social requirements. But silver lining, I also found some good example at the local level. Really where the answers is often given on a case-by-case basis. And there are particularly interesting cases, for example, in Italy, of a social ESCO giving priority to shared and temporary buildings and housing and homes for young people with drug addictions or women victims of domestic violence, for instance. And for me, it seems a very, very relevant approach because it allows to reach more socially excluded people and those who are really, really invisible. We had this discussion with Clotilde when she told me, social housing, it's when you reach a social house, you're almost middle class. You are not the part of the society that is totally excluded. The people who are totally excluded, they don't reach the social housing. So it's really important to think beyond social housing as the one solution, especially because in Eastern and Southern Europe, social housing is not that widespread. And finally, the third lesson is on the minimum energy performance standards, because honestly, today we still lack insight on their impact. And even if the idea is quite good on paper, who says that the most fragile will not fall even more into the hands of unscrupulous slumlords? We know that the most vulnerable do not use their rights. Therefore, the MEPs must absolutely be enforceable rights, and public authorities must be able to step in to help families. I mean, it has to come with the ecosystem helping people. And of course, the ambitions might be even too low. So it's really important that, people are not locked into a barely better situation, let's say it this way. So Yes, please.
Excuse me, someone is asking what are MEPs, so just maybe to put back in the framework, so MEPs are mandatory energy performance standards, and there is legislation now at European level to push for mandatory energy performance standards in the residential sector. So I just wanted to put that in. Sorry for interrupting you.
Yes, sorry, I didn't get into too many details about this, but indeed, minimum energy performance standards, if you read through the report, they also have kind of proven advantages to really improve the building stock, but they must come also with some very specific social safeguards. And for the time being, they are implemented only in a handful of countries, so it's really hard to know. It will be. I mean, it's really important to just be mindful that they might have impact that we are not aware of at the moment. So it will be a lot of work for the years to come as well. Thank you for this question. So going into the let's say the discussion on the positive social impact, moving into the report, we saw that we can see that indeed deep renovation, really deep renovation, minimum energy performance standards can be quite positive for the quality of life, addressing unfit housing and reducing the risk of energy poverty. And for instance, a report published in France showed that the occupant of the 5% of the most energy intensive dwellings, particularly those on low incomes, were exposed to an increased risk to their health. And if the average annual health cost is up to 7,500 per year, including 5,700 on social costs related to mortality and 1,400 in loss in well-being and 400 in health cost. So in practice, the energy renovation of the 1.3 million dwellings whose final consumption for hot water, heating and air conditioning is above a threshold of 378 kilowatts per square meters per year. To move to an upper level of consumption, it would prevent the death of 2,200 people each year. That study also estimates that the renovation of what is called thermal sieves would avoid a health cost of 10 billion euros per year. But it also leads to a reduction in rent to years and voids benefiting landlords. And here, I think it's also important to mention that most landlords are actually small landlords who may not have many other sources of income. So it's also really important to have this in mind. And then when I mentioned trust and broader community benefits, it's because the active participation of the beneficiaries with local support is one of the keys to turning, environmental impact into broad society and community impact and willingness to receive future assistance. It's like sometimes it's one of the first steps people will make that will later improve their situation. And it would also help to step out of the logic of housing financialization and, for instance, having those kind of cuckoo funds that buy for cheap decayed places and dwellings and just put them back, renovate them and put them back on the market at a much higher price. And then, of course, the positive economic impacts can be really good on local job markets and overall on the prosperity of the society. But I would leave that to economists in general. However, there might be also some potential rebound and negative social impacts. And for instance, when I mentioned the problem of unsustainable and unfit renovations, it's because there might be some, making few tasks at the time can be very, very intrusive to the privacy of the people. And whereas the comfort or financial gain might be very, very minimal, especially if you go through a step-by-step approach, it could really trigger some kind of a negative response to making further improvements in the home. And it can also hide or create additional problems of mold or also fire safety if the building envelope is not thought really through. And here there was a very, very, very good example coming from Hungary. I'm sure one of the experts will mention that later, where the comfort of the inhabitants had not been taken into account, leading to even worse situation than it was before. And then one of the problems are the unrealistic energy improvements with, for instance, overestimated consumption at first, or a rebound effect when savings may be absorbed by other users, meaning that since people are spending less on their energy, they may be spending more on other things. So they're overall, let's say, a basket of purchasing power will not really increase, but so it's really, really hard to quantify the benefits on a really purely energetic level when we think of energy renovation. Then there are, of course, the challenges in the funding stream with remaining costs that might be really, really complicated. I mean, for many people, they might not be able to put €1 in their remaining cost to finance the retrofit of their home. So it has to be really super low. And there might be a lot of distrust in banks and financial intermediaries. There might be also difficulties to access banks, loan and credits, especially if they have a bad credit score or if they are over indebted, etc. So it's really important to have like a trusted intermediaries and also a lot of people in banks that actually know what they are talking about, and they know how to make that happen for people, but also for condominiums and at the condominium levels, for instance. And then there is this question of the affordability crunch, because when you make energy efficiency improvement, it might lead to higher costs in the purchase or rent of the place, meaning that basically it becomes not affordable for many people. And especially as now we are seeing it with the cost of living crisis, the wages, pension, and benefits may stagnate or are eaten by inflation and rising costs of everything in general. And other three main dangers are the lack of acknowledgement of the social factors, meaning that very often we think like the people who run this project, they think of the technical aspects and not about the information and dedicated support that household may need. It can neglect people's lived experience and the fact that for instance they might have some other issues, or the aging of the population is something that you have to keep in mind, and it's really really important that you think of the issues of the mobility of the people that may come in the later years, especially if you retrofit the home of people who are a little bit older. And then the social factor also is about the social and temporary accommodation, about the shelters, hostels, etc., that may be temporary but can also last for long. So it's really important to put some really safeguards on those kind of housing as well. Then, of course, the accelerated renovation and gentrification, because energy efficient renovation may only be the tip of the iceberg. Overall greater social injustice, such as evictions, occur because of many issues, including the neighborhood gentrification. And if you think of improving the reputation of the overall neighborhood, you will increase the rents, but it will lead to displacement and segregation, and some marginalized groups will look for cheaper alternatives elsewhere. And it's really about the snakes that eats its own tail, because they will always move further where it's becoming even more difficult to live in decent housing conditions. And finally, there is a real danger in the kind of one-size-fits-all policies. because in Europe we have heterogeneous housing, urban development, climate, and economic fabric, meaning that our buildings are different. So it really means that it's important to make the programs as tailored as possible to the needs of the local population, and it means also it means also very clear understanding of how the governance of the renovation policies should be like. So on the recommendation, and it's my last 3 slides, it's really about prioritizing deep renovation, like deep renovation, meaning not only jumping from a terrible class, even worse than G, but to F, but it would be moving from G to E or D or C. It would be C would be like would be great, but if you could already move to a much better class, that would save a lot of time and money, etc. But it also comes with the really putting people before profit. And then the energy performance certificate, they have to include the living conditions of the inhabitants, and in order to consider housing a right and not just only an investment opportunity. Then the financial tools for the low income, it means also 100% grants and financial support that is really targeted at those who need it most, and not widespread to everyone, as we can see in places like Germany or Italy, where you have really like this law of the jungle, where the most healthy, wealthy, and witty will access everything before everybody else. And the European Cold House Fund is really an idea from FENSA that I found really interesting, to dedicate some EU funding really to the colder houses throughout Europe. And then, of course, this idea of social and community housing. There were really good example coming from Vienna, for instance, with a non-financialization of the housing market. And then on my last recommendations are really about actively prevent renovation through rent caps and renovation bans, and also about assessing the situation in the private rented sector. We still miss some data about this specifically. And for instance, how those rent caps and renovation bans could be like, if you benefit from a certain level of help to renovate your home, you should keep the same level of rent for at least 2, 3, 5, 10 years. That could really like be the condition. Then you have really the enforcement and the implementation of the right to housing, meaning implementing really the Article 31 of the European Social Charter, including on legal representation. Again, I will repeat it. Vulnerable people don't access their rights, so it's really important to make some streams to help them access their rights and enforce what are actually human rights. And also have like a better understanding of the social impacts of indicators in like the overall monitoring frameworks, because at EU level we have some monitoring frameworks of the EU of the housing market, and really have to not think only about the building, but of the how people live inside those buildings. And then if we think about beyond the building sector, it means also having a more horizontal participation and inclusiveness of all parties, and really link up to all sectors and policy areas, not only building regulation, but also regulation, taxes, environmental and energy policies, and also social policies together. So really, it's about thinking really out of the box. And then, yeah, really, we have to really keep in mind that there is no one size fits all to put green and social justice at the center, and the short-term tools that exist for some challenges do matter, and especially for the poorest, but they have to be designed for the poorest. So that's it for me. If you have any question, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Marine. we're a bit tight on timing, so what I would suggest is that we continue with other presentation and that we have the Q&A after. Would that work for you? I already have a question for you, but sorry. So the idea is really to have an interactive meeting. So please feel free to jump in with questions, prepare your question for the Q&A session. Maybe what I didn't explain is that we asked Marine for an overview of the question at European level based on her own expertise and on the input we got from other experts. And so now we will ask actually, so Hannah, Esther, Nikos and Merik to present to us their research, which brings more of a regional perspective on energy poverty and renovation in Central and Eastern Europe and in Southern Europe with the example of Greece. So I suggest we move on with Anna, and then we will have a first Q&A session for Anna and Marine. So please do get involved and let's make it an interactive meeting. So Anna, you will present research on social justice and more ambitious energy standards. That's correct?
Yeah.
Yes, I
and the
give you
minimum
floor.
understanding. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone really enjoyed Marine's really beautiful slides. I don't want to disappoint you, but I actually I inserted a lot of text, but I promise to be quick. Please hold on a second until I share my screen. This is always the most exciting, and I really try to keep the time. Please let me know. Can you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, then just hold on for really a second. Okay, now it's in a slide modus. So we really focused on, we focused, as Clotilde said, on Central and Eastern Europe and in the Baltic parts. And the research I will present very briefly was done together with my colleague Esther Turai, who is not here today because she is not working at MRI anymore, but this really, so this is definitely not my work alone. Just a few outlines. So what we did want to understand a bit, and this was just some background documents, so not a complex research that we did for Fianza, is what this, what the mandatory energy minimum energy performance standards will mean for poorer households and poorer countries. We do know that the purpose is noble, but we know it will trigger very important renovations and will help to phase out the worst performing buildings. But at the same time, we do not know the exact social consequences. The very specific focus on the socialist countries, on the former socialist countries, was because these are countries with lots of poor owners who are endangered. Please allow me to start with a few background statements. So what we know currently, there are a lot of renovations going on in these countries. However, actually more than in the Western and Northern EU countries. However, they are not as deep. Importantly, energy efficiency refurbishments are supported almost everywhere, albeit with varying intensity, and the support structures can be very different. If you look at the heating and energy, these countries rely much more on fossil fuels and solid fuel heatings than in other areas of Europe, which has really problematic health consequences. And although energy efficiency is supported, there is a lack of workforce, which will become increasingly a major bottleneck if the renovation wave really begins. So what we could do in this background document, we don't know what the introduction of the mandatory MEPs will mean, because that's in the future. What we could do is to look at existing public support schemes and try to understand how they try to look after the average owner and the poor owners in this post-socialist EU state. What we do see, and this is something that I mentioned at the beginning, so reliable and long-term renovation schemes exist almost everywhere. They're typically a mix between grant and loan elements, but actually the commitment to supporting low-income groups really varies. And even in the case, if we have, there are some cases, I will mention a few, where you have a commitment. However, often these groups are so disadvantaged, facing a complex set of social and legal and economic difficulties, that even with 100% subsidy, it's sometimes difficult for them to engage in renovation. So that's something that should be kept in mind. There were three basic questions that we had in mind when working on the document. So the first one, of course, if policymakers actually address the affordability implications of more ambitious energy efficiency requirements, and are there efforts to make these interventions available for the poor? And of course, the answer is yes, and increasingly yes. There are some efforts, however, they are sporadic and they often quite arbitrary. So this would lead us to the second question. If there are such efforts, they typically target very few households. So they are not, they exist on a national level. And then that leads to the third question, where I also have the answer. So what happens if these questions are sporadic? It means very likely, but this was not the research that we actually could do in the framework, that there is a large chunk of the population that probably cannot really engage or cannot engage comfortably with the existing schemes, but is too rich to receive very specific socially supported schemes. And that's something to think about in the future. We looked at 4 countries a bit more in detail. They were chosen due to have sort of a geographic representative in this post-socialist area. So we looked at the case of Lithuania as a Baltic country, Croatia as a sort of Balkan country, and Slovakia and Hungary representing Central and Eastern Europe. This is what we had time in this small research framework. I will just want to highlight a few things about it. One is that Lithuania is primarily interesting because it has not only does it have a very well established scheme that's mainstreaming energy efficiency renovations. It's that's actually one of the few countries that has a targeted scheme for the vulnerable living in multi-apartment buildings. That's actually a rarity. So if you look at Croatia, it means they also have a complex set of renovation packages, and they also have one with that has a socially targeted grant element, 100% grant, but they go for then single-family houses. The same is true for Slovakia, but this is something that they will start to work with single-family homes, trying to introduce a very socially targeted scheme. And in Hungary, we chose Hungary not because only we are Hungarian, so we know the case very well, because I think it's a lessons learned. It's a fantastic example of how not to do policies, and I think you can learn a lot from bad examples. So just something I'm not going to go into details because you can find them in the reports. Something that's quite interesting about the Lithuanian case is that so this has been the involvement of poor owners in the refurbishments has been very much supported by municipalities, especially since 2019. The scheme is actually available since 2013. So some, as we talked with experts, have applied a reverse rule. So if a household was eligible for 100% of the funding and voted against the renovation, then they were sort of trying to blackmail them with actually cutting their social benefits back. I think the question is, so what it's important that there was a big support from the mid-tier level, from the municipalities. The question is right now is that these households were selected based on who have received heating compensation, and it seems now that this has increased. The number of households who are receiving heating compensation has increased dramatically. So the question is whether the municipal budget will be able to keep up with this increased demand. That will be, and I think they are thinking about a bit restructuring the program, partially because of this. What regarding Slovakia, regarding Croatia, what I want to emphasize is just one aspect. So they focus this socially targeted grant on people who have been receiving unemployment benefit or disability benefits. What's important, and I think that's something that we often forget, although very much essential for the success of the project, is that these people, they can apply offline. We tend to forget about the digital divide, and they receive free services supporting them in the application process. So, but these are relatively few households. So that's you don't have the case what you have in Lithuania, where the number who are eligible are increasing. Croatia is also thinking about introducing something similar to the multifamily buildings. However, most probably that will be primarily based on war damage done in a particular area. So that's a different program. A few words about Slovakia, which is, I chose to include it not only because I think it has a massive and very successful mainstream program, where gradually the grant element was substituted by very favorable loan elements. They don't plan to introduce social schemes for residents in multi-apartment buildings, and the habitat expert Zita Kaka-Sikova, with whom we talked, estimated that about 30% of the multi-apartment buildings are likely to have been left out of the program. There is something that I want to just point out here, which is important. That sometimes, I mean, if someone doesn't want to engage in a refurbishment in a single family home, it's possible for them to opt out. However, it's a bit more difficult in a multi-apartment building. So, and typically, and that's also the case for Slovakia, but definitely for Hungary, many of these multi-apartment buildings have mixed income populations. So this could be a danger, that if the majority votes for a refurbishment, then some households could have difficulties paying for that. We wrote a separate paper for Fianza about the possibility of renovictions, and we still so far think that the transaction costs are higher in an ownership market, most likely for most families. So they will stay and won't sell their apartments. However, it can create really big difficulties, especially if there are no targeted schemes. As I mentioned, the Slovakian scheme that they are planning from the resilience and recovery plan will target single-family homes, and as it is foreseen, they will cover 95% of the renovation costs. And finally, this is Hungary. I think it's worth a whole study and a whole story. It's a very interesting case because the country used to have a well-functioning and generous support scheme. Right now, there are various support schemes, but there is neither energy targeting, not really social targeting, either. The whole renovation scheme is part of the family support policies. And it's a very strange thing. Just to sum up, there are two concluding remarks, is that we think right now that for the successful introduction of minimum energy performance standards, the expansion of the restricted targeting, so the current restricted targeting of the vulnerable should be expanded. That's lesson one. And lesson two, often, I mean, that depends on country to country. Probably more generous grant schemes could be planned or should be planned, especially for low-income households where the real estate also has a low value. So that's for low-income owners who are too rich to have socially targeted subsidies, but at the same time who have difficulty coming up with the amounts of money themselves and reside in low-value real estates. This is, I hope I was a bit longer than expected, but this is in a sense that I wanted to say. I hope it was clear.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was very clear. I would like to ask participants if they have questions, and while they do, I will start. I'll kick off with a question we received from Veronica. In the context, which stakeholders, NGO, charities, or local authorities are best placed to provide home energy advice and renovation financing related support to vulnerable households, so to act as one-stop shops? What are the framework conditions to successfully carry out this task? So I think that's a question for you, Anna. And Veronica, do you want to add something to your question?
Yeah, thanks for reading and addressing it. Basically, my question is about, we talk a lot about availability of funding and how it has to be targeted better, but I think it's also another angle of the problem if these people have the ability to apply for the funds, because it's a complex environment. And I think in our countries, maybe there is also an institutional gap of, so basically, yeah, I would like to hear your take on this.
I think, Veronica, you're totally right. And this is why I actually emphasize a bit the Croatian example, that they hear the energy poor, or, the ones who are eligible for the extra funding receive also help in this, in the process of application. I'm a great believer in municipalities, or in the power of, well-operating municipalities. I think one-stop shops should be placed on a municipal level, or when there's a bigger city than on district level, and they should be able to reach out to housing managers, or they should be able to go to, in case of single family homes, to areas where they, with the help of social workers, again, employed by the local municipality, and reach out towards vulnerable consumers.
And do you think, in your opinion, they would have the financial resources to do this, or they would have additional, so where would this additional funding come from?
That's a super good question. I think right now, I don't oversee all the financial resources of the different countries. I can only speak of Hungary right now in this sense. I think that, but generally, probably there's always a lack of financial resources. However, I think right now, and these are sort of exceptions, many municipalities are trying to engage in this process with the help of various projects, EU projects. So this is, I certainly know of a project called PowerPool and a project called RenoPont, and they both focus on setting up one-stop shops. One is focusing on vulnerable consumers. The other is actually a one-stop shop for consumers in general who nevertheless need help. So it's also a financial issue. And I think in this very specific institutional context of Hungary, these targeted EU funds can be a solution, precisely because these things are not so costly. So it's often one or two extra people and the good management of social workers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Veronica, for the question. If you have other questions for Anna or Marine, please ask them now. I have one question, Marine. Amongst your recommendations, you speak about deep renovation, and there is a tension here, of course, from the perspective of adequate housing, because ideally we want everybody to have the best level of renovation, but we do live in a context of lack of financial resources. So it's complicated. Do we want to go for the quick wins so that everybody can benefit a certain level of renovation? Or if not, how can we ensure this deep renovation is actually available? And this will be a question as well to you and Hannah, because you did say some people are too rich to benefit from the schemes. So it's about allocating the limited resources that are available from the state. So Marine, maybe first, and then Anna. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question because it's really about the chicken and the egg. Where should we start? If we start somewhere, I mean, if you listen to certain experts of renovation, and they will tell you that if you don't go immediately into the deep renovation, meaning mobilizing the home, mobilizing everything that has to be and doing everything that has to be done in the home, people will just give up because they will like, okay, I've done something, it's not as successful as expected, so whatever. So the next renovation or retrofit or whatever will come years after. So, you know, it's this kind of approach may kind of kill the potential of energy savings and comfort improvement that you would get from deep renovation. But it's also true that it might be extremely complicated to mobilize the funding and the art and also the workers to do everything at once. So in the report, I actually put you can check it. It's on page 46. I put a 47. Sorry, I put a map of the of the different works that should be done in which order, because the order actually matters. Just to give you an example, if you have a very poorly insulated home and you put a heat pump, and then you do the improvement, the envelope of the home, and really like you make it kind of airtight, the heat pump may be overdimensionated. It might be too big for the actual need of the home after renovation. So you end up losing time and money, and also comfort, because you have something that is too big that you don't really get the benefit. So it's really important to respect the order of the different actions, and that would start with really roofs and attics, then ventilation, then carpentry, then heating and hot water, then the walls, then the floors, and then what is called the interfaces, such as thermal bridges and air tightness. And that's why it's really important to have also workers and programs that think about the whole life cycle of the building. Because if you do something too early or too late, you may not, you may lose a lot of the potential, you may lose a lot of the benefits of the actual renovation. So it's really why it does matter what kind of technical aspects we put into the word renovation.
Thank you very much, Marine. Anna?
I think I will say something very similar to Marine. I mean, looking around, the countries that I know best, I think I'm a great believer in incremental and step-by-step change. But I'm also fully aware that that's very classically way. If you're, you know, poorer households tend to pay more because they pay in installments. In a say, if you have the money and availability, of course, it's much better to do deep renovation in one go. But my experience says that that's hardly possible most of the time, because even if the funding is somehow never generous enough for that, I think what matters is just to have foresight and to have advanced planning to evade any kind of lock-in effects. That's what actually Marine was mentioning. So you need to have a plan, but I think, again, being realistic, you need to reckon with the fact that yes, it can have adverse consequences, and people might stop midway, then think about the fact that at least that was done. So overall, the best thing if you do a lot of investments at once, but I think it's also important to stay on a ground that's feasible.
Thank you, Anna. So thank you to Marine and Anna. we will move on. I'm aware we are terribly late. I don't know how this happened. I'm very sorry to the next speakers. So I would like to ask Esther to continue on the perspective from Central and Eastern Europe on increasing energy standard and unfit housing. So Esther, the floor is yours, and I'm sorry about the delay.
Thank you. I try to share my screen. Is it okay?
Yes, great, thank you.
Can you see now? Now it's in projecting mode? Yeah.
No.
No, not yet. Okay.
No.
Not now. Okay.
Oh,
Thank
yes,
you.
no.
Okay, so we did also a background research, and it was a small scale research as well on increasing energy standards in unfit housing sector, and the aim and the context of the research was to examine the nature of the problem and what solution can be delivered also in the CUE countries. And we can see that although in some respects housing system differs in these countries, but they share many common features. As Hannah said, it's very much because of the low proportion of social affordable and municipal housing, the poor living owner-occupied sector on a very large scale, and it also means that poor live in rural areas and very much concentrated in the least developed regions. So in the research, we choose Hungary as an exemplary country to illustrate different kind of problems of the unfit housing sector. We presented the smaller scale projects for renovating unfit housing. Now I don't have time to show them, but there are several such projects are in the study. And we have to emphasize that although energy efficiency was not a major element of these projects, but the focus was upscaling the housing quality. We examined the programs in deprived neighborhoods of urban areas, and also just some Roma settlement improvement project was included, but we also looked at rural projects, what could be done there. We have to also say that it's a specificity, as also Hannah already said, of the Hungarian system, housing policy, that energy efficient investment was not a main focus of the housing policy, despite substantial EU funding was available, economic conditions were favorable, but generally these policies helping middle class to get access to home ownership. And this is an important thing to stress. So we just add very quick background. You see that, of course, as several kinds of poverty, we use terms of poverty like income poverty, housing, and energy poverty. And we discuss a little bit that why is it important to distinguish them. And we really think that housing and energy poverty increases the inequality, social inequalities in societies. So those who are suffering from housing and energy poverty has a worse chance than compared to those who are simply can be featured by income poverty. And we also think that significance of energy poverty has increased and will increase in the future in terms of effects on social inequalities, and mainly because the EU regulation and decreased carbon emission, and also the increased price of energy that we can already experience. And here I'm just showing some data on energy poverty and housing poverty. So in the second column here in the you can see these factors in the total inhabited stock, and in the last column you can see their significance in the lowest income quintile housing conditions. And you can see that substandard housing almost affects 1/5 of the inhabited stock, that many households in Hungary heat with primarily solid fuel heating, which is had very bad environmental effects, and unaffordable energy costs characterize 10% of the households. Also, the average share of the household's income is rather high. It's more than 20%. We can also see that substandard housing and primary fuel heating affects almost 10% of the households. So these are some very basic figures just to give a hint of the scale of the problem. So when we looked at these exemplary projects, we identified the technical, economic, and social challenges. And the first, let's look a little bit to technical challenges in case of urban multi-unit stock. And the unfit housing really can be found in the multi-unit historical buildings built before the Second World War. So they are quite old building stock. And we could see that projects, or we could examine projects that upgrades dilapidating municipal stock. They were mainly in deprived neighborhoods. And we could also see that the first task is to ensure the functionality of the building. And this is, I think, very important because it's the same in the rural stock. So these buildings doesn't have just the problem of that their energy performance is very bad, but also that flats needs to be modernized. They lack some of the very basic utilities, let's say water, inside water, toilets, and also in case of the buildings, the basic structural and mechanical system has to be refurbished. We can also see that there is a trade-off, as is a big challenge in case of historical buildings, that whether to keep preserve historical heritage or improve energy efficiency. And this concerns very much the possibility of insulation of the building. And the other very big challenges, we could see that this is the heating system, how to transform the heating system if the gas system should be replaced to other energy. But the big question was what kind of energy should be used in the long term. It's also, as Anna said already, that lock-in effects should be avoided. So these deep kind of renovation really requires lots of investments. But really it was not when there is as existing urban structure with buildings, what kind of energy could be used. And we can see that solar energy have a kind of limited possibility to use in case of this multi-unit building, as roof surface is too little, so they can account the savings which can be achieved by installing the solar panels. It's like 10%. We also see that individual flat solutions in multi-unit buildings are less effective. And the good way to go would be central heating and building level, or use district heating. But also there is a very high cost of building out the system inside the building or on neighborhood level. And energy is still a question then electricity, geothermal energy, heat pumps would be used. We can see that the possibility of energy communities is important, but there should be feasible solutions or still needs to be developed. And we see that also municipalities are not enough themselves. They don't have the knowledge, the invention capacities to develop such solutions. So they would need more help from the national level to work on this solution. And we also see that maybe bigger city district level infrastructure development is needed, for example, to build out district heating in some of the areas of the city. So when we look at the rural unfit housing sector, we could also identify several challenges. We see that much of this sector consists of adobe houses, which requires some specific technical solutions. We also see that, again, here, some of the basic modernizations needed to connect to utilities, to replace the very broken structure, just windows, doors, roofs, and then we can think of really the energy, to improve the energy performance of the buildings. Here, to use some modern technology is easier than in the case of multi-unit buildings. And also it's easier to switch from gas to electricity or other form of energy. But we also see that in many cases, when you improve the comfort level of these houses, the maintenance costs will be increased, and the vulnerable families will need housing allowances to cover the increased housing costs. So this is precious. We could see very good examples energy for establishing energy communities in rural areas. One of the pilot projects of the complex program targeting these developed villages included the social solar park pilot programs, when in the village a solar park was created, and the income from selling the electricity to the electric grid was used to pay housing allowance for the most vulnerable families. However, it has limitations, as the current regulation in Hungary now rejects to establish new contracts with the electricity company because the capacity of the electric grid is not enough to take up this additional energies. So we also identified several economic and social challenges, and one of the economic challenges that there is a general approach that the renovation of unfit housing is worse when the cost of renovation is smaller than the value of the home. But in many cases, we see that it's not the case, and the cost of renovation can reach the value of the home or just stay a little bit below, and especially in locations where the housing prices are very, very low. So in rural areas, underdeveloped regions. So we really suggested that instead of these, renovation costs should be compared to the option of buying another housing, an existing housing, somewhat of better quality. And we should also take into account the renovation cost of this housing to have a better energy performance. And we could see also good examples for this. Also in this complex rural development program, the social organization helps vulnerable families to get access to the mainstream home ownership subsidies to buy another house, a more of better quality, and renovate that with grants and subsidies loans. So really, they do not provide, the social organizations do not provide any extra funding, but use the mainstream funding. In such cases, when we do this and also the mobility of the households should be taken in account. So whether it is worth moving to a better connected village or stay there, and also the general economic development of the regions should be paid attention in this complex program, and also the transport system, developing the transport system, we see that it is very, very, very important. So housing improvement cannot really take in itself, but it should be placed in a complex development strategy. So we also saw in case of urban programs that the renewing of municipal housing tend to include the most vulnerable people with very low income and irregular income, mainly those households who were indebted and lack legal title to housing. We also saw that housing with higher comfort level has higher maintenance cost, and in many cases, municipalities did not have the tools, the financial resources to provide sufficient subsidies to maintain the housing for vulnerable groups. And this can be this can have the danger of crowding out the poor to peripheral areas. So we saw that the pace of phasing out the worst stock, it very much depends on the rate of newly constructed housing, but not only this, but also the extent how the newly constructed housing has the filtration effect and generates that is generated by the new housing construction. So when how this new construction can affect the most vulnerable people, their chances to move to better housing. Okay, so some solutions we suggested, and the focus was not only to improve the physical condition of the unfit housing, but really to improve the situation of those living in unfit housing. So whether it concerns their current housing, or to provide other housing instead of the current unfit housing. So we could see that also it is a complex issue, and quite many dimensions should be taken into account, but we could see that projects cannot really address all of these dimensions. And this is why these projects really focus on rather the physical improvement of the housing sector, and not of improving the situation of those who live in this housing. we can see that EU funds have substantial role in the renovation of unfit housing, but the possibilities are really not used as much as they should have been used, and there should be some more policy measures in this regard. And we are talking about phasing out the worst sector. We really think that more increase the affordable and social housing stock is needed, and the subsidies targeting the most vulnerable also needed. Nowadays, disproportionately housed in the owner-occupied sectors, and maybe when we improve their situation, they should be placed in affordable or social housing sector instead of this owner-occupied sector. We also see that vulnerable groups should get access to modern technologies so they can also enjoy cheap and healthy energy, which is now not the case, but rather the opposite. And we saw that non-refundable grants should target low-income and vulnerable households. As we can see, this investment has very high costs, so maybe a solution to hybrid ownership can be think of in case when the investment costs amounts to a very high share of the housing value. Maybe as we talked about that it should be considered how the infrastructure system should be transformed in urban and rural areas. And we also see that the national government has really an important role in this, in planning these kind of developments. And as also was mentioned, technical assistance to vulnerable group, to get access to technologies, financing tools are very important. And also we see that the correction of welfare systems are really needed. And these energy efficiency focused renovation projects should have an integrated approach that also tackle the complex social problems of the vulnerable groups. Thank you. I don't know how much I ran over, but sorry for that.
Thank you, Esther, for this very interesting and in-depth presentation. Indeed, I'm a bit worried that we were asking Elena from the European Commission to start speaking 5 minutes ago, and we still need to hear from our two experts from Greece. So, and we already have two very interesting questions in the chat, but I suggest we just delay them for now, and we'll go back to Esther and Marine and all speakers after that. Thank you, Elena. And I would like to ask Meik and Nicolas to jump in, and I'm very sorry for us being so late. And why did your presentation, if you have the possibility to make link to what we heard from the context in Central and Eastern Europe, I was particularly interested by this idea of institutional gap as well. I wonder if it's something you face in Greece. So I leave you the floor. Thank you.
So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, great. Thank you.
Great. So Merj and myself looked at the impact of potential impact of energy upscaling on property values, and we did it from the perspective of access to housing. So to deal with the consequences of the pandemic, the EU deployed a stimulus package worth over 2 trillion in grants and loans. Within it, the Next Generation EU is a package with an investment pot of 750 billion aiming at supporting the transition to a greener, digital, more resilient Europe. At the heart of the European budget is the Recovery and Resilience Facility, valued at roughly 724 billion to support reforms and investments in cohesion policy. The renovation wave stands as the single most impactful action of cohesion policy for the housing systems of member states and the built environment at large, promising to double the annual energy renovation rate of residential and non-residential buildings. Through the RRF, Greece will receive the largest funding in proportion to the size of its economy, around 17% of its GDP, or almost 30 billion, adding annually 3.5 points to the GDP from 2021 to 2026. For the report, we looked at the architecture of the Greek RRF and the energy upscaling programs in Greece to date to see whether there are safety nets embedded in them to prevent rent increases as a result of renovations. The hypothesis is that without due consideration of social impact and not factoring regulation and control against potential rises in house prices, RRF risks exacerbating housing commodification, financialization, and displacement trends. So we assume that in the given context, there is reasonable certainty that large-scale renovations of the residential housing stock can lead to deepening social divisions, a decline in living conditions, and a serious risk of formal and primarily informal evictions. So we purposefully chose to focus on the specificities of the context in which these investments are to operate, because we consider this key in informing their potential outcomes. In Greece, there is an absence of social housing stock, making Greece an outlier even when compared to its South European counterparts. A lack of any institutional legacy in regards to direct control over the housing market for tenant protection, as well as an absence of tenant organization, since renting has long been regarded a transitory phase. Most of the residential properties are apartment buildings in blocks built in the decades before 1990, whereas most of them were built between 1971 and 1980 under conditions of an unregulated construction regime and absence of construction standards. For instance, in the metropolitan area of Thessaloniki, out of the approximately 203,000 dwellings, 130,000 were constructed in the 1980s. The stock constructed before the 90s lacks insulation and has high energy and thermal requirements and costs. So by the start of the 1990s, it was credit that became crucial for preserving the purchasing power of households, bolstering the housing model. A halt to this trajectory came with the global financial crisis in 2008, which turned into a state debt crisis. Unemployment rates skyrocketed. The annual disposable income of households fell by roughly 38% between 2010 and 2016. Mortgage arrears swelled from 4% to more than 45%, translated in the bank's books as an increase in non-performing loans. Moreover, Greece was recorded as having the highest percentage of vacant houses among all EU member states. Out of a total of roughly 6,400,000 dwellings, 35.3% or 2,300,000 houses were vacant. Since 2017, however, property prices are beginning to rise. A portion of the population continues to sell properties to save on taxes and debt, while real estate investors have started buying. These trends, on the one hand, marginalization of the homeless, the squeeze of owners, the precarization of the defaulted, and On the other, the ongoing state-aided commodification of the built environment reverberate to the entire housing domain, lead to spiraling rent increases, restructuring the tenure status. According to the 2019 EU Silk survey, persons at risk of poverty or social exclusion represented 30% of the total Greek population. In addition, 36% of the population was overburdened by housing costs, a share which has more than doubled over 10 years. Low-income tenants already face strong problems over the past few years, especially in the neighborhoods close to urban centers. This is reflected in data which show that a staggering 79.2% of tenants in Greece spent more than 40% of their income on housing in 2020. So given the age of the stock, its inadequate construction standards and the high number of vacancies, its energy and structural upgrading is considered urgent. Yet, there needs to be a regulatory framework to prevent rent spikes and to make the renovated homes accessible to all. We use Thessaloniki as a sample case to show the links between property price increases and renovations. The impact renovation has had on rental and sale prices so far can in fact provide important indications that the renovation investment exclusively targets private owners and in fact benefits the sale market for real estate rather than the rental market. One could cautiously conclude that renovation investment may not be impacting the rental market through a direct causal link with increase of prices, but may indirectly impact rents due to a shift of properties to renovate to sell.
So now we will move on to the specifics of the main instruments basically in Greece at the moment for the energy upgrade of buildings. And just to note, of course, there are many details in the report and I will refer most of you to that and we'll just give you some highlights today in the presentation. But as of data of 2019, 23% of the total population is reportedly unable to heat their homes, while this percentage in 2017 was 41% for low-income households. In the report, you'll find details on the policy measures that have been developed to counter this trend. But today we will talk about the funding instruments and to tackle energy poverty and reducing energy consumption at the level of residential buildings. And that is the Exikonomo program, the Energy Upgrade of Buildings program, which we will call SAVE hereafter, which this started in 2011 and provides financial incentives to households, including to low-income households. The aid that is provided consists of non-repayable grants and low-interest loans, including subsidy of the interest rates and the coverage of the energy inspection costs. Since 2011, about 227,000 households have benefited from the program, and the continuation of the program until 2021 aims to reach out to 105,000 more households. For the upcoming years, the RRF is going to be mobilized to finance the renovation process within these programs. And it foresees in Greece that 1.6 billion euros, the share of the green pillar of the RRF, will be dedicated to subsidies to cover these needs. I'll quickly, without going into more detail about the program, talk about the challenges a little bit in the framework of ensuring housing inclusion. First of all, the renovation investment as it stands is not focused on renovating for generating social housing stock, especially in a country with no social housing stock. This would have been quite important. Or also generating affordable housing provision for tenants. The only program in the RRF linking social housing provision and renovation is a pilot social housing project funded with the RRF funds with a fund of 1.5 million euros only. And it also, again, focuses on generating a small stock from privately owned properties. The second challenge is the difficulty to identify and support energy poor households living in rented residences. That is within the framework of the SAVE program. The program provides a fluctuating subsidy level depending on the level of income, ranging from 75% for low-income households to 40% for high-income households. The subsidy does seem generous for low-income households, but the program still depends on their ability to generate a significant amount vis-a-vis their income to cover initial costs, as well as co-financing. So actually, the instruments do not reach the most vulnerable homeowners, either because they're not eligible or because they're reluctant also to apply for a loan through banks. Despite due attention to those most affected by energy poverty, the interventions and their monitoring frameworks don't adequately distinguish between privately owned and rental properties. So they do not actually adopt a holistic consideration of interventions to prevent potential risks associated with increase in prices for sales and rent levels after renovation. Tenants are not included as a distinct target group with tailored measures in renovation programs. And when we look at the statistics, tenants are definitely underrepresented. Also, yes, privately rented apartments are eligible, but the program does not foresee measures to protect tenants after renovation. Also, the program is benefiting a consumer audience with the income to pay the enhanced housing costs as a result of renovation, inter alia as tenants through short-term rental platforms, golden visa recipients, etc. To conclude, this provides to us viable concerns that given the increasing interest in real estate in Greece through private investments, a share of these units will not be available to lower income households, as private investment is unlikely to provide energy efficient housing to poor households due to low return on investments. The intermediation of public institutions in energy upscaling, like in the case of Greece with the SAVE program, may have positive effects on lower income homeowners due to the subsidy coverage. But nevertheless, the retrofitted dwellings is still an upgrading of private housing stock in a very unregulated housing market. So in the absence of control of affordable housing outcomes for households as a result of renovations, energy poverty and housing prices combined demonstrate serious risks of eviction for populations already at risk of exclusion.
So in the report, we provide a set of recommendations to adopt a national housing strategy with horizontal measures across sectors and policy areas, with green and social justice at its center, to commit renovation programs and RRF funds for the renovation of private and public dwellings for the creation of a social housing stock, to adopt regulatory measures to convert long-term vacant housing for affordable use by social housing providers, to foresee specific protection measures for tenant-occupied dwellings in the major energy upscaling programs, to ensure that there is 100% financing of energy efficiency investments for low-income households, to consider 100% grant support for retrofitting for very vulnerable and low-income households, to diversify beneficiaries and include housing co-ops and cooperatives and alternative housing providers, to deduct the amount of the interventions from the amount of the loan to be repaid in the case of mortgage ownership, or from the total rent in the case of tenancy, to include more robust and relevant indicators in the monitoring framework for innovation programs, to monitor social impact, especially tailored for low to very low income households. Any system of housing exclusion related monitoring should also include impact of renovation and energy improvement investment. And given that renovations concern primarily single apartments, we suggest programs to encourage deeper renovation of whole buildings and their static reinforcement, to counter benefiting only property owners who are able to afford the renovation costs of single apartments. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. We already have a few questions, but please, I would ask participants to ask your question in the chat or raise your hand so I can give you the floor. Esther, can you come back, because we have questions to your report as well. So
Yes.
I see Catherine and Lydia. Do you want to ask a question? Yes. Okay, so I'll start by giving you the floor, but please, speakers, don't respond right now, because I will ask you all the questions I have, and then you can respond, so we save time. Please, Catherine.
Thank you. My question goes to one of your suggestions, what to do. You said you would you advocate for measures to protect tenants after renovation. That's a really tricky thing to do, but what are your ideas? What specific measures do you think of?
So is this addressed to Greece in particular?
Yes,
or to,
yes.
Yes, okay.
Or to anyone who has ideas, actually.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's 11:30, so I will tell you the other question I have, okay? Which is a bit the same, which is actually what can we do about it? And at two levels, national and European level. So at national level, Eva is asking, what is the most important recommendation you suggest to include in the updated national energy and climate plan of the respective country you explored to address the challenges you explained? So national level, and then European level, how could EU policies be of help in the next 2 to 5 years to effectively facilitate renovation among energy poor households? Where should efforts be concentrated? So quite a simple and straightforward question, but I would like to ask you, so maybe first Marine, then Esther, then I don't know, Nicolas or Merrick. Please, Marine.
Yes, so I think first and foremost, we have the EU has to value the work performed at a very, very local level. And that comes with really helping municipalities and also rural communities overcoming certain challenges. And I mostly think about this funding issue, because money is always at the heart of the problem. And so I think it's really about maybe it's something that I saw during the like making the report, that governments at the national level, sometimes they are not so willing to act, whereas municipalities may be. So you know, trying to step above the national governments to empower the local level could be one of the things. And then regarding Catherine's question, I think one of the issues I already mentioned it is really about providing some safeguards, but of course it's super complicated. So you know, not increasing the rent for a certain number of years if you have received some public funding is a thing that is quite straightforward to do, but of course there must be many solutions targeted really at the local and the specific situation.
Thank you, Marine. Esther? So tenants, national level, European level.
Yes, well, answering to Catherine, of course, besides what just Marine mentioned, I think rent and subsidies and housing allowances has a big role in handling these problems. And of course, it very much depends on the welfare systems. And one of the main limitations that these countries has doesn't have such provisions in Southern Europe, or just very limited, and also in this Central European countries. So, what was the other question you wanted to?
So concrete recommendation of what would you suggest to include in the national energy and climate plans to address the challenges you have identified in your research? And at European level, if you could speak to the European Commission, we have Elena who is here. What would you recommend to effectively facilitate renovation amongst energy poor households? Where should efforts be concentrated, knowing that there is a competency limitation for the European Commission, of course?
Yes, I think the National Energy and Climate Plan really should include also include the increase of affordable housing sector, and it should really something work together with national housing policies, general measures, and these two should be developed in a comprehensive way. So not really, it's not two different things, but the coherency between these two policy lines really should be increased. I think that now it's very much, there's two parallel lines of these policies. Let's say one is to improve energy efficiency, performance of the housing sector, and one is dealing with the social program of the housing sector and affordability. So these two should be really linked and handled in one coherent strategy. And I think at least for the Commission, I don't really see now how the Commission, in a way, I think it's now it's a it's a kind of missing from the Commission approach to really stimulate more the member states to increase their affordable housing stock and use EU funds for this goal. And I really think that they should require member states more how they would help the energy poor people and how they would provide decent housing for vulnerable groups, the most vulnerable groups. I think this too is very much missing. We can see it in the policy recommendations, of course, and the policy recommendation of the Commission, but really when the member states provide their plans, what to do, it's not really required from them. So there is not a focus on the concrete actions of the member states to really implement such kind of programs.
Thank you, Esther. Nicolas and Merrick, do you want to react?
Yes, thank you for this question. It's really a really important question and indeed tricky. But given that in Greece there is minimal, no regulation and no tenant protection against evictions, we say that as a prerequisite for applying for these programs, there should be a precondition, long-term fixed rent contracts. And also, we would say, in order to be short and brief, rent controls, rent caps. That would be our suggestion.
Thank you. And on the two other questions on national level and European level, Merrick, do you want to react?
Sorry, I was just replying to something in the chat, actually.
Okay, thank you.
And I will continue replying to that, but I just want to say several people have been mentioning also the municipality level intervention. And I definitely understand the value of that. However, for instance, in the context of a country like Greece, which is highly centralized, the mandate of municipalities is extremely limited. And even in terms of monitoring of housing exclusion, there is no, let's say, systematic monitoring in place, neither at the local level nor at the national level. And while the mandate is limited, I think that a lot of the programs should take into consideration a lot more the local conditions that have been mentioned. And all these things that we say, regulation and all of that, will have to, in the context of Greece, be, let's say, put forward at the national level at first. And then we will see the trickle-down effect, hopefully, at the local level.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Elena, we're all looking at you now, and I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but I thought it would be very interesting to hear your views on what the experts have gathered, the analysis of the national level of the risk attached to the European ambition which sometimes seem to be very strong in terms of environmental performance, but maybe the social side is not completely under control. So what are your thoughts when you hear from Greece and from the MRI? Thank you. First, thank you for being willing to come and speak with us.
Thank you for the invitation and also the opportunity to expand my knowledge, also the knowledge of my colleagues. I'm happy to report to them. I guess I'm here actually because I'm part of the consumer unit in the GNR. We deal particularly with the energy poverty and vulnerable consumers for the entire DG, and also I'm the annual representative in the negotiation of the Social Gamma Fund. But more colleagues, I'm sure, will be happy if they are not already aware, if you are not already in touch with them, particularly colleagues negotiating the EPBD currently, or the Energy Efficiency Directive. I'm sure they will have interest in what you said, your lessons learned. Maybe I'll comment a bit on what has been said right now on the national energy and climate plans, because I think this is a document which has been underestimated. I would say both across EU institutions and maybe among stakeholders for us, and I can also share that Mission is actually emphasizing that very much in the context of the even the negotiation on the Social Gamma Fund. This is the main strategic document for a country on energy and climate objectives, and there we have tried, and I think people here are very much aware, to encourage the member states to offer, let's say, an integrated view on, for instance, on how all their policies that should target, in particular, energy poor and the vulnerables, could help improving their situation. And we see that there's still a long way to go. I mean, you yourself, you have highlighted how conditions are different depending on the country. We think it's unfair that consumers, especially the most vulnerable in different countries, have a different level of protection and support. And also, in addition to what's happening in the current crisis, so programs and schemes that perhaps could have brought positive outcomes before the crisis. I'm talking about before the pandemic, because I think we also have lessons learned from that period still to assess now cannot be anymore fit for purpose. So it was interesting also to hear from you how the current crisis is actually changing, this context. Also, apart from the NECPs, where we also try to encourage also more data sharing information. And in that respect, information from the ground, from your projects is really important to us. And I'll make sure also that more and more colleagues take that into account when they do their assessment. So there are, again, there is still a lot of work to do in terms of really explaining the situation at the national level and how it is also how they could collaborate more with the different level of governance. Then I think in the current crisis, apart from the legislative initiatives that are currently under negotiation, the possible rediscussion, reopening, or refocusing of the recovery plans is also an additional opportunity you have to present your arguments and for us to be aware of those when we are engaging with the member states on already existing programs, so they can be corrected, take into account your suggestions, or even refocus and replan. And I think we shouldn't miss this opportunity. It's an important opportunity despite, the let's say unfavorable circumstances we find ourselves in. For the Social Common Fund, I just want to share that it has been somehow surprising how concrete were the discussion have been the discussions, especially with the member states, the presidency, but also with the parliament on the type of measures that could be funded. I'm aware also, obviously, of the criticism around the type of, say, funding and the impact of the ETS on already vulnerable people. But I would just want to focus on the measures and investments for us in particular. The GNR, it's important, given that to not perhaps prejudge a positive agreement with the co-legislator, I think we left a bit open the conditionality that should orient measures and investments that member states are taking. And there maybe you can also help because just to be sure that whatever will be the size of the fund, and it's also we are already aware that this is not a fund resolving all problems and possibly will be used in a consistent way in correlation and in synergies with what is already existing from other sources and programs. Everything which is targeted to those who are the beneficiaries, and these are correctly identified, and the measures are tailored for them. And this is and there is, if possible, the least use for temporary short-term actions that are funded in particular through direct income support. This is our view, and this is the line that we will try to defend till the very last minute of the negotiation that seems could conclude under the Czech presidency. So perhaps in 2 weeks we will have an agreement. So I think with that, for the EPBD, I guess you are very much aware that there are very different views in the parliament. So we are still engaging with them. So even there is room to be sure that even the starting point of the negotiation is set on the right foot. And I don't know if you have any specific questions. Happy to reply to those.
Thank you very much, Elena. Is there any specific question? Okay, I have one because it came in the chat and it came from some of the speakers. So the importance of the local level. Do you see a role for the European Commission not to bypass the national level, but to be stronger in empowering local level to directly support people in situation of energy poverty.
I think in particular in our unit, which has local initiatives, even in the title, we absolutely advocate for a role at the local level. We are aware that, as you also explained, in many cases, and not only for this type of policy, but also other policies, I mean, the role of municipalities is absolutely key. Even in legislative initiatives, I think the Commission is always trying to include let's say the engagement with the regional and local level. Sometimes it depends a bit on the type of management of the program, of the fund. So for instance, Social Economic Fund and the recovery facility are a bit different than other type of funding in terms of how do they engage with other level of governance. But for us, it's also key from what you just presented for the lessons learned from the ground, for the outcome from projects. So in that respect, I hope you are in touch. If not, please let me know. Even our agency, CINEA, I mean, we discuss with them, and particularly now we want to discuss what could be, the perhaps new priorities also for projects who will address, in particular, energy poverty, or will be of interest for the most vulnerable. So I think I hope they're aware as well. We can find a way to speak together to them of the results from your projects and your considerations. But I mean, I don't want to. We know that, especially I'd say from life in the council, not all member states recognize the role of local level the same with the same importance that perhaps should be attached to that. So in that sense, I think in the Commission we can certainly help with that.
Thank you very much, Elena. I think I will slowly start to bring this webinar to an end, but please don't leave, because I really want to thank many people who have been making this possible. And first, I think I'll say thank you to the European Climate Foundation, who has financed the work of Fianza on energy poverty and has made this possible. Thank you to all of the experts involved. So there is a lot of data we have collected, and we have to see how we take that forward. We really want to deepen our understanding of this link between energy poverty and unfit housing, and how to make the Green Deal really like a decisive game changer for adequate housing and lower income households. So please watch this space, get in touch with us, and let's see how we can cooperate and continue to work on this issue. So thank you to the experts. Thank you very much, Elena, for your work in general at the European Commission with this vulnerable consumer unit. It's really good to know you're there and keep on the good work. And thank you for your openness with Fianza. So I had prepared a short conclusion. What I wanted to say basically, I think the key for Fianza, if there is one thing we want to make sure, is how can we prioritize lowest income groups in this green transition, and how can we target better in the future the funding, the limited funding available to benefit for lowest income groups, and why then? Because of the disproportional impacts that some of the measures can have on lowest income groups. So it's about preventing renovation. We haven't presented the briefing we have done, but there are actually two briefings in the page you will find. One particularly looking at renovation in the context of former socialist country of the EU, and one more general briefing done by Fianza on renovation. So how can we address this risk of renovation? How can we design financial tools for lowest income groups? How can we empower national level implementation? And what can be done regarding European funding, whether it's social climate funds or looking a bit further up to the next MFF. So FIANSA will continue to work on this issue, and we really hope we can link up with you because I think we are stronger together, and we are aware of this strong link between unfit housing and energy poverty. And there is a lot to do to seize this opportunity of the Green Deal. So thank you again to all of you. I'll keep in touch. I will send you the presentation. The video will be made made available online. So yes, this is just a start. Looking forward to further cooperation. Thank you again to you all. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.